Hi there, it's Christy with the Chirp YouTube channel. Today I am here with a little message for you about tantrums and meltdowns. I recently had a great big tantrum in my own life. Not me personally, I should say I dealt with a big tantrum in my own life. And that's kind of what prompted this little video today. I've talked about tantrums and meltdowns in the past. The main time that I talked about that is in a video I did on sensory integration and social emotional functioning. I'll put a link to that right here. I'm going to mention that video again later in this message. But that was basically about all of the different ways that you can sort of prevent behaviors that turn into tantruming and meltdowns, and how you can sort of try to figure out what's underlying those behaviors so that they don't happen as frequently, and so that you know what to do when they do happen, because you know sort of the meaning behind them in your own child or your own student's life. This video is going to be more about what to do when it's too late for all of the prevention and we're in the moment of a tantrum and we need to know how to handle it, what to do, and how to move through it in a way that's helpful for the child, as well as that sort of keeps you calm and rational. So I'm going to lead you through some steps today, and the more that you can rehearse these steps in your mind and with your family, the more that you can sort of stay on the same page together, the more helpful they will be. First of all, I'm going to define what a tantrum is for you. A tantrum is a way of making your life so miserable and unpleasant that you do what your child wants. Now, it's not always a child who has a tantrum. A grown-up can have a tantrum too. But if you think of it as sort of terrorism a little bit, a very small person as a terrorist, doing such terrible things that we want to give in because we want those terrible things to stop. That is what tantruming is. This behavior is not necessarily well thought out or purposeful, but it is learned. And the more often it works, the higher the chance that the child will keep doing it because it's meeting a need. And I'm going to put a link right over here to another video that I did on something called a functional behavior analysis. That is a good tool for you if you're trying to figure out what it is that's the trigger behind some of these behaviors. And it will also help you sort of think through your own responses to your child's behavior, because your child's behavior leads to a response from you. And if that response encourages the behavior, that behavior will happen again. So go take a peek at that video at some point, maybe after you finish watching this one. Whenever you click on a link, by the way, this video that you're currently watching will pause. A new video window will open up and that video will start playing. So if you're more interested in that topic right at this moment in time, this video will pause and I'll be waiting for you here when you get back. So I'd like to differentiate between a tantrum and a meltdown. Oftentimes the two terms are used interchangeably, but I would like to make a little bit of a differentiation in this video, because this channel is not only for parents with typical children. This channel also serves a population of families and classrooms that deal with children who are not typically developing. So either they have some sort of a diagnosis or developmental delay, or they have some behavior difficulties that mean that they don't respond to things the same way that a typically developing child would. And so I believe that we need to make a differentiation between a tantrum, which is very typical. We all do it, we all have them, no matter our age, no matter our gender. Everybody has had a tantrum and probably will have a tantrum in the future as well. And a meltdown. And a meltdown is more significant. And for management purposes, for managing the two, it's good to have a clearly defined line between which one is which. So a tantrum is usually a behavior that begins because the child is not getting what she wants. I'm going to use she in this video, even though, of course, males have tantrums too. I'm going to use she because the tantrum that I dealt with last week was a young, well, she's not that young anymore. She's a teenager now, but she is a young woman with autism, and so I'm having her in my head, so I'm just going to say she. All children occasionally have tantrums, and these situations usually require nothing more than consistency from families over a long period of time. Usually children will progress through the stage of needing to have a tantrum in order to get that particular want or need met, because it becomes clear, if you don't respond how she wants, that her behavior is not meeting that need, and so it might be better to use a different style of communication. And that process I talk about in that functional behavior analysis video, and also in the video that I posted a link to earlier, which talks about the social emotional education and the sensory processing disorders, because all of those can lead to behaviors we don't like because there's an underlying need that's not being met. In this video, I'm mostly going to be talking about a child communicating a desire through negative behavior and being angry enough when we don't do what she wants that she totally falls apart and is either aggressive or violent or screaming and inconsolable for a long time. That is really unpleasant, and that's what we're dealing here as we're talking about tantrums and meltdowns. In autism and in other disorders that have a sensory component, sometimes a person will become so overwhelmed by sensory stimulation or by the inability to cope with the difficulty of life at that moment that she begins to completely melt down. These events can begin as a normal tantrum, but it's really hard to predict which ones will turn into a big meltdown and which ones won't. Not always easy to tell. Sometimes a regular tantrum because Sally can't get the candy that she wants in the checkout line at Target. Sometimes this is a regular tantrum. I'm going to cry for 10 minutes and then I'm going to get over it when you don't give me the candy. Sometimes it turns into the I totally can't control myself. Even if you gave me the candy right now, I would still not be consoled because life is horrible and you are a horrible parent. So a meltdown is a complete loss of control. Usually in a tantrum, a child will keep her eye on you because she is trying to manipulate you with her behavior. So usually the child is still somewhat in control. The child likes to think she's in control of you during this tantrum, even though as the grown-up, you are the one who should be in control. And the child is definitely still choosing her behavior based on what she hopes you will do. In a meltdown, the child is no longer in control of her behavior. She's no longer watching you to see what you're doing. She is just out of control. Some key features of a meltdown are that a meltdown usually has sort of an aura beforehand, sort of like a migraine. Apparently people who have migraines can sort of sense that it's coming. Sometimes there's a visual aura that things look different through their eyes. Sometimes there's an auditory aura. They actually hear noises differently. It's kind of the same thing for a child who's going to have a meltdown. Sometimes there are verbal phrases that the child will repeatedly say. Sometimes there's a certain sort of walk or a certain behavior that the child will do that can indicate that she's going to have a meltdown. The child may make certain sounds. Some kids start to growl or stomp their feet, things like that. My little friend gets really stiff arms and legs. She makes a funny face like this, and she starts saying, "Gonna hit you, gonna kick you," hate you, shut up. And she says it in a really growly sort of voice. Every part of her has gotten very stiff and inflexible, in addition to her behavior becoming stiff and inflexible. In a meltdown, a child does not care about getting hurt or hurting others. They're not trying to do it on purpose, but they also don't care if they happen to. A child in a meltdown will not, like I said before, will peek at you to see if the behavior is getting attention or getting the response that she wants. She's not thinking about that at this time. The child is incapable of communicating effectively or of processing incoming communication. The pathways are jammed. There's nothing going in and nothing is coming out successfully. If you offer the child what she wants right then in the middle of that meltdown, it still would not stop the problem, because the problem is no longer about that one thing. The problem has become an all-encompassing, I can't handle life sort of situation. It's not just about that candy that you did not give her. And meltdowns need to wind down. They don't just stop. Most of the time, it will go from the aggressive, violent, hitting, screaming, kicking, swearing kind of meltdown, and then the crying and sort of, I'm not going to get what I want out of this. This is horrible. And then the body, in this case, it's not just a breaking of the will. It's also breaking through the body's fatigue level. Kids sometimes really do have to rage themselves out. Sometimes it takes longer than others. And keeping them safe during that process is part of this plan. So a meltdown does not just turn off. It has to wane gradually. Most of the steps for dealing with tantrums and meltdowns are the same, but I have to add that more than one person is usually a good idea if you deal with significant meltdowns, because one person all alone is usually going to become emotionally overwhelmed and also might not have the physical ability to keep herself or himself safe, especially if the meltdownee is an older student or a larger student. So I told you what inspired this video was that I dealt with the meltdown in my own life, and in fact it was in my own home as well. I invited my teenage friend Jay over on President's Day to make pizza with me and her grandma. So she has gotten into the idea that she can take stuff that isn't hers, and so she decided to take some of my money from my change jar in my bedroom. We're trying to work on the fact that when you go to visit someone's house, you can't just wander into all their rooms. So I'm following her and I'm talking her through how when we're grown-ups and we get invited to someone's house, we stay in the main living room area unless we have to go to the bathroom. And then we ask if we can go to the bathroom. We don't go in people's bedrooms. We don't go in people's offices. We don't wander. We stay in the main room. She didn't like that. And so we're still talking through this when she sees my change jar on my dresser. And so she says, take the money. I'm going to take the money. And I said, no, you can't have that money. That's not yours. This is where the ramping up started that I was talking about. I could tell that the aura was sort of beginning. She got very stiff. She got that wrinkle between her eyebrows, and she started saying, take it, hit you, shut up. And she started getting very verbal and saying those same phrases that I've heard lots of other times in this tone that I happen to know for her is a precursor to this behavior. So already I'm thinking, okay, I do not have a tantrum-proof home. We don't have kids that live with us. We don't have kids at all. And we have an adult home. This home is not safe for a meltdown. So what am I going to do when this ramps up? And no matter how hard we try, sometimes a tantrum is going to happen. And so please don't blame yourself when a meltdown or a tantrum happens. It is not because you didn't do all of the previous things that you know you should have done. we can do those things, but even when we put all of those things into place, sometimes a child's behavior will still break down, and sometimes we still have to deal with the consequences of just having had a bad day for this poor child who doesn't have good self-management skills. The first step that I want to talk about is don't give in to your little mini terrorist. As I discussed in previous videos, consistency is a huge key to managing challenging behavior. If you give Sally the candy when she starts having a tantrum in the aisle at Target, then what you're saying is, look at you. You had a tantrum. I knew what you meant. I gave you the candy. Your tantrum was a really excellent communication strategy. Good job. So she's, of course, going to do that again, and that is not what we want. So instead, you want to make sure that you have a plan, that when you go to Target, you think, okay, lately she's been crying through the aisle every time. So number one, I'm going to go through an aisle with no candy in it. Number two, I'm going to prompt her beforehand. I'm going to say, there is no candy at Target. We'll have some toast when we get home, or we'll have maybe even something better. Maybe we'll have a cookie when we get home if you don't cry. So there are lots of ways to get through that process. And I talk about that in the consistency video. I'll put a link to that right there now that I think about it. But consistency is key to sort of beating these behaviors and getting over that hump of having that behavior happen all the time. I guess another way to say this is that we ignore that behavior. By ignore, I'm not talking about you let your child melt down and ruin your home by knocking over your expensive things and pulling your lampshades over and kicking your dog. That's not what I mean by ignore. What I mean by ignore is that we just don't do what we know the child wants us to do. We're not allowing ourselves to be manipulated by that child's negative behavior, because your child will do whatever it takes to get you to do what she wants, if you actually do it. If your child has a big tantrum that's totally exhausting for her and she still doesn't get what she wants, that's not very reinforcing. So we want to not reinforce that negative behavior, and that will help it not happen as often. Okay, step number 2 is empty the arena. So think about the area where you'd like to manage this behavior if it should happen to become aggressive, and make sure that that area is free from anything that might get damaged or add to the problem. That includes furniture, breakables, anything your child might hit her head on, and other people, noises, smells, lights, especially flashing lights, all of that. So picture your child as a tornado during this time. So really windy, circular type thing. Picture her spinning and spinning and spinning, and anything that would affect her sensory system in any way, sounds, sights, smells, people, auditory inputs, anything like that. All of those things add to the tornado. They're just fuel for that spinning rage. In order to process through a tantrum or a meltdown, a child needs to have a safe, quiet space to process. And emotions getting processed takes so much internal focus and energy that a lot of times anything that comes in from the outside just adds to the problem. So think about that as you're finding your arena to calm down in. Remove people and items from the area where the tantrum is taking place. Leave one adult behind, but send everybody else to a different area of the house to have lots of fun without the child who's having the tantrum or the meltdown. The family should not shut down and revolve around that challenging behavior from that one child. We don't want that child to get the idea that she runs the show based on her behavior. Most of your family is going to enjoy having this evening together, even if you are unable to participate in that. Quietly tell the rest of the family, Sally is having a hard time, so we're going to go down in the basement to play Wii together while she calms down. And maybe Dad stays behind to monitor and to go through the calming process with her one time, and maybe Mom stays behind the next time. If there's only one of you, then I'm sorry, it's you every time. But you can have a plan for the other people in the family. If there are siblings, maybe they get a special treat. Maybe they get to watch a movie that otherwise they wouldn't get to do on a weeknight while you're helping Sally calm down. The idea is that the rest of the family is not cowering in fear while Sally is having her moment and while she needs to work through this calming down process. The rest of the family is perfectly fine, and she is missing out on something enjoyable because her behavior isn't allowing her to participate. So in my case, since I don't have a tantrum-proof home, I physically and pretty forcefully, since she outweighs me now, guided Jay to the area right in front of my couch. I do have a coffee table, but I pushed it over to the side, and I set her down on the ground. She wasn't forcefully resisting me at this time, even though she's yelling and she's trying to hit, and she was hitting stuff on the way over there. I thought she broke something of my husband's, and I thought, oh my goodness, now I'm going to cry because I can't control this person that I love so much, and she's hurting stuff of another person that I love, and my husband has never seen a meltdown before, especially not to this degree, so I didn't really want him to have to see it. Anyway, I took Jay over by the couch, sat her down by the couch so that her back was up against she wasn't on the couch, she was sitting right in front of it. And she was willing to sit there, but then she kept trying to hit and grab stuff so she could either throw it or break it. And she was kicking her feet really hard on the ground. And so because I happen to know her well enough to know that she benefits a lot from deep pressure. So hopefully during this process with your child, if you have tantrums or meltdowns like this, hopefully you're working with an occupational therapist who can talk you through some of the sensory needs that your child might have. If you're not, I'm going to talk more about that at the end of this video, so keep watching. And I also talk about it in the sensory integration video that I linked to at the beginning, and I'll put that link down below in the info box as well. But I happen to know that she benefits a lot from deep pressure, and this is deep squeezes or pressure on her body. It helps her to feel calm. Well, I don't have a lot of sensory equipment in my home because I don't see clients here, and this isn't a classroom where I come prepared for all eventualities. So I did the next best thing I could, which was to sit on her legs. And it did actually make a difference. And I'm happy to say that. It didn't make a difference right away. She was still yelling and saying horrible, mean things. But she was not hurting anything anymore, and that's where the aggression stopped. After I sat on her legs, after, I don't know, maybe it was 30 seconds to a minute, it wasn't very long of that sort of deep pressure, that instead of yelling and saying mean things and trying to break my stuff or grab things to throw it across the room, instead she started to cry. And with her, when she starts to cry like a 2-year-old, like big heaving sobs and actual tears, which from a teenager is just heartbreaking because it just shouldn't be happening like that. But when she started to cry, I knew that she had gotten the idea that she was not going to be able to do what she wanted in this circumstance, and she was not going to get her way, and that she needed to spiral out of this behavior because it wasn't going to work. And the moment of the tears for this particular child is the moment when the tide turns and things start going in a better direction. For other children, it turns out differently, but there always is a turning of the tide. And usually when you stay firm And when you work through this process, you'll start to see in your child's behavior, oh, that was the moment right there when I X, or when she, when I gave her that big, deep squeeze is when she sort of relaxed a little and wasn't so stiff. That's when she stopped swearing, or she stopped hitting me when I sandwiched her between two couch pillows and sat on it, so she was nice and squeezed and calm. As you go through this process with your child, you will begin to see that there is a moment at which the tide turns. Maybe for you and your child, it also is deep pressure. Perhaps when you are able to sandwich your child between two couch cushions and lie down on it, perhaps that is when your child begins to stop hitting you, or when the swearing stops, or perhaps it's when you turn the lights and the fan off, or the radio that was playing really loud music, or maybe when you turn off the TV, all of a sudden your child sort of melts a little bit and she stops trying to harm you or herself. So look back after the tantrum is finished and think through the process. When was it that the tide sort of turned? Because that's going to help you. If you can turn the tide sooner, then you will have less of that challenging behavior that you don't like so much. Step number 3 is pick one phrase. One phrase. Now let me give you some hints. For example, you might choose something like, when you're done, we'll have a cookie. It's very simple. We want to start with when you're done, and then something that is highly preferable. It might be an activity that you only do once in a while that you know your child especially likes. It may be a food item that is not a normal part of your child's daily diet, but that is a special food. It might be a game that your child really likes to play. Whatever it is, you are telling your child, let's wrap this up real quick here because I'd like to go do something more fun. And at this point, your child is realizing you're not going to capitulate to her desire for whatever it is that started this tantrum. And she's probably anxious at this point to get out of this behavior too. But kids get stuck and they don't know exactly how to wind things up. I had one really brilliant mom whose child got in a snit every once in a while. Typical child, not terrible. She didn't even really have tantrums. But I thought this was a really good hint that I'd pass it on. Her child would just get in a snit, not be able to snap out of it because kids have trouble shifting emotional states, just like they have trouble shifting attention from one thing to the next. And the mom would say, I'm going to pretend this little girl's name is Amber. The mom would say, where is that happy Amber that I saw yesterday? Can you go look in the bedroom for me? Maybe she's hiding under the bed. And this is when the mom knew that her child wanted to not be grumpy anymore, and the child just couldn't figure out a way to do it. And the child would come back and say, no, happy Amber is not there. But she'd the first time she didn't have a smile at all. The second time the mom would say, can you go look in the bathroom? I'm pretty sure that happy Amber must be somewhere. I just can't seem to find her. And the child would go look in the bathroom, and by this time she's smirking a little bit. So not only is she getting a little bit of time to process in her own way, but her mom is telling her, I know it's hard to snap out of this, but you can do it and I'm going to help you. And so it gives that relationship a lot of good support too. So that's what we're doing here by saying, when you're done, we can. You're trusting. Your child is going to get through this tantrum. You are going to get through it together, and you are there to help her when she finally decides to turn it around. So you don't have to use food, but definitely it should be a highly preferred activity. If the child loves trains, tell her that when she's calm, you'll play trains. If your child loves to swing, tell her that you'll go to the park to swing when she gets all done. You might use a phrase that indicates that the end of the tantrum has come. So a lot of times when a child is done tantruming, they need a tissue. because they have snot everywhere. In which case you might say, she's not done yet and you know it, but you might say, do you need a tissue or do you need a washcloth to wipe your face? Sometimes that's enough of a shock to the child's body that the tantrum does actually end, because the child is used to tantrum ends, tissue or washcloth. And if you move up the tissue or washcloth, the tantrum ends because that end is reached. Sometimes those phrases can help the tantrum to end sooner than it otherwise would have, because the words themselves lead to the realization that the storm will pass and it will be better on the other side. So using the item that triggered the tantrum is not a good idea, because that just reinforces that you have this tantrum and at the end you get what you wanted in the first place. So if Sally's having a tantrum because of that candy at Target, don't say, when you're done, we'll have that candy you wanted. That's not really a great plan, because that is going to reinforce that tantrum, and that's what we do not want. Step number 4, repeat the phrase you chose and only that. Try to not say anything else. Think again about that tornado and about how everything that you say, all the sounds, smells, sights, they're all going into this whirling wind, and they all can add to the frustration and the anger and the number of things that your child's body has to process. And so we want to keep that amount of things as small as possible. So just say that one phrase and try to say nothing else. Think of the last time that you were in a red alert moment. So maybe you were irrationally angry, or maybe your feelings were very hurt by something and you were just bawling and no one could console you. Could a reasonable person have negotiated with you in that moment? If a good friend came up to you and said, you know, it's not reasonable of you to be this angry, or wow, you seem really out of control right now, what do you think your response might have been? Because I think for me, I would really want to punch that person. I would really dislike that person in that moment, because those are really patronizing things to say. And I would add you to my list of things that I was really angry with if you did that to me in that kind of a moment. So putting yourself in that situation, you can kind of see where some of this aggression comes from in kids sometimes, because we really do patronize them. We boss them around, we try to control them, and we do not give them enough time to process their emotions and to communicate what they need and what they need us not to do. So sometimes it's a good idea to ask your child too, what helps you when you are in that red alert moment? And once again, I'm going to recommend you to the social, emotional, and sensory integration video that I did, because it talks through a lot of resources to help you talk with your children about their emotions and about how they prefer you to support them when they're having a difficult moment. Number 5, pretend that you're a professional and that none of this is personal. With Jay, I'm not her mother, but I am a person who's been in her life for a really long time, and I love her like I have never loved another child. And it does feel personal to me when she tries to hit me, when she tells me she hates me. I may not have spawned her myself, but it still hurts my heart. And I know that all of us feel like that when a child that we love is in a red alert moment, having a tantrum or a meltdown. But in order to best deal with it, we need to pretend that it's not hurting our feelings, that we are detached and professional, and that it's not personal against us. Because honestly, it's not personal. Only to the degree that your child would not be having those behaviors with you if she didn't know that you were trustworthy. So kind of a compliment, I guess. At the same time, it's horrible and we wish it didn't work like that. But if you can stay detached, you're more likely to deal with the behavior in a way that makes it less likely to occur. Some tantrums take longer to pass than others. If it's a real meltdown, and if it's a deeper thing than just a passing fancy, then it's probably going to take a little longer to pass. A normal tantrum, I would say anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes probably for a typical child. But I've known children who were I've talked before about a little guy that I worked with who would tantrum for hours on end. And you know, he does not have a diagnosis now, I don't think. And I believe he is definitely in a mainstream classroom. I think he may get some resource support in a couple of different areas, but he does not have behavior support, and he is a good functioning member of his family now. And that should give you a great deal of hope. Even if the behavior seems really bad in the moment, it can get better, and you are a huge part of that. So number 6 is follow through. This is when you're going to notice some of that sagging. Your child won't be quite as stiff anymore, though the hitting will have stopped. The crying will be waning off. And of course, your child's not like swearing or hating you verbally anymore. Everything's kind of waning off. It's like the rain is sort of falling slightly. Maybe there are still a few tears, or every once in a while, that sort of thing. But that angry whirlwind is calming down now. So what we want to do here is we want to offer lots of love. And this is really, really hard because, of course, as the people who just witnessed this horrible explosion, what we're thinking is, I am going to kick you to the curb. This is not happening to me again. You just squirted ketchup all over the wall. You just kicked the dog. Whatever it was that the child just did, this is what we're thinking. And we're thinking, how can we punish the child for that thing? However, what's really important in this moment is that you draw a line after those behaviors. You draw the line and you move forward with the child, because the child's not done with the recovery yet. And so in this moment, what you need to do is follow through with whatever it was that what your one phrase was that you said during the meltdown. So for example, if you said, when you're done, we'll have a cookie, you offer the child a tissue or a washcloth and you say, are you done? And if the child says yes, then you say, okay, I'll get our cookies. If the child starts crying again, you say, okay, when you're done, we'll have our cookies. So you're staying very calm. You don't need to say anything else for a really long time. You just want to give the child the chance to recover from this tantrum. When the tantrum is over, you can decide fully over, maybe for the rest of that day, I wouldn't really talk about it all that much, because your child is still processing and learning from what happened. The next day, maybe when the weekend comes, you can start to talk about it with some of those social emotional skills and tools that I presented to you in the video that I will link again to right here, because it is a really helpful one. You can get some of those tools and you can start working through that after the red alert moment has passed. After that really bad day with the tantrum, you can start implementing some of those strategies. You can't do it right afterwards. The child is too fragile, and so are you. But you can start talking about it not long afterwards, and you can say, remember when you got really upset and you felt like a tornado and you were yelling and saying bad words to mommy and daddy? Do you remember that just a couple days ago? Can you tell me what made you feel like that? And you can start talking through it. And you don't have to figure out exactly what to say. There are tools in that video, so give it a watch and get some of those tools. Most of them are available on Amazon and are not difficult for families to implement at all. So that is when to sort of start talking through the process to hopefully prevent it from happening that way again. If you have no idea what could be triggering your child's moods and tantrums, take a peek at that video about sensory integration and social emotional skills that I just linked to right here. I walk you through the steps of identifying things that could set your child off and ways to prevent those challenging behaviors. If your family is really disturbed by consistently challenging behavior that's really throwing everyone off, there are professionals available to help you brainstorm and to help you figure out ways to be more successful and help your child be more successful too. Because a person who can't manage her own emotions and her own being cannot be a functional part of society and can't be a functional part of a family either. Success in school, success at work eventually, success with friends and a family of her own is not going to happen if your child doesn't learn those skills. And if for some reason there's some area of that learning that has sort of fallen through the cracks, then there are professionals who can help you figure out where the holes are and sort of build over those to make sure that your child does have a good foundation for moving forward in life. You are not a failure if your child has tantrums or meltdowns. Like I said, all children have tantrums. Most children have a meltdown at least once. And it's not usually because of the parents. Usually there's stuff going on internally in a child, whether it's a sensory disorder, whether it's difficulty communicating emotions. There are lots of different reasons why children have difficulty managing their behavior and their own selves. So don't take that upon yourself as a criticism of you just because your child is having tantrums. What I am so impressed by is the fact that you're searching out ways to help your child. That makes you an A1 parent in my book who deserves a medal. And if I had a medal that said A1 parent, I would give it to you right over the internet, because it's really scary to have a child who is out of control or who you feel is out of control. And it's even scarier to admit to somebody else, I'm having a little trouble with my child right now. I'm not exactly sure what to do with these behaviors, and I don't know what's behind them. But there are professionals who can help you. And I bet that if you happen to share that phrase or something similar with friends, with people at your church, with people in your child's preschool classroom, anything like that, that there will be other parents who say, I had the same problem and here's the name of somebody who helped me. Or, you might want to talk to the school district about that because my child got XYZ services and is doing so much better. So don't be afraid to search out people who really can help you, because that's what our jobs are. And we love seeing the kids make that incredible progress that most of them do make. I can't fix a deep-rooted problem like consistent, long-winded tantrums over the internet. I hope that you know that. But there are professionals who can, and I am biased, but in most cases, I think a good, experienced speech-language pathologist is probably your number one pick for trying to figure out if there are reasons communicatively why your child's behavior is escalating the way that it is. A lot of times the child is not able to communicate something or has emotions that need to be expressed in some way. And the child isn't able to do it successfully, so these tantrums come out. So speech-language pathologist is a good option. An occupational therapist is a fabulous option. But I would suggest please make it one who has a specialty in sensory integration and sensory integration disorders, because a lot of those tantrums come from being oversensitive to stimulation and having so much going on in our modern world that little body just can't take it. Some people also choose a behavior analyst. That's not my favorite choice, just because most of the time I have found that a behavior analyst doesn't have special education background, and they're not usually very well trained in sensory techniques. And so that's a whole area of expertise that is just not contained within that particular field. So if you choose a behavior analyst, make sure that they have other certifications and other expertise besides just the behavior analysis part of it. I've put a whole bunch of other links down below in the drop-down info box, so please take a look down there. I hope those links will be very helpful and encouraging for you. I know that this is a very difficult area, a very difficult topic. I am proud of you for seeking help for your family and for your child, and I will be praying that you find exactly what you need to help you, help your child, and help your family. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.